a couple of interesting things that we had actually discussed in the offseason was the Vikings might miss Kirk Cousins being there, right? And one of the things that I was so curious about and looking back is now both of these guys have played 8 games thus far from when Kirk Cousins got hurt last year to where Sam Darnold is for the Vikings right now. How do those two things compare? And is the same thing, the main thing that we've complained about is that the defense, just for whatever reason, they don't step up in the times that they need to. And they're good enough to get them wins like they did at the beginning of the season, but can they finish? Or is it really just the quarterback problem? Because one thing I guess that Sam Darnold gives the Vikings is that he's a little bit more mobile than a Kirk Cousins, for sure, and the stats do say that as well. But it was Kirk really the problem? I mean, it's not like, you know, Sam was running around everywhere. So before we get into the stats, let's you know, this is our opinion piece right now. So so Khalid, what are you thinking from everything that you've seen so far? Like, you weren't here before that, but we always rung the bell that we didn't think Kirk Cousins was as bad as especially Vikings fans were saying that he was.
Yeah, well, when you put up numbers in general as an offensive player in the league, you're doing your job, right? You're a receiver and you're bringing in a lot of footballs and you're getting a lot of yards, you're putting up touchdowns, you're doing your job, right? So if your team is losing games, but you as a receiver are producing, how can you get the blame? If you were a running back, you rushed for 1,400 yards and 10 touchdowns, you had 300 more yards in the receiving game, but your team loses, is that your fault?
Yep.
No, it never has been. But when the quarterback, especially a guy like Kirk Cousins, and you know, we've talked about this even when I have been here, he was putting up MVP numbers, no joke, last year before he got hurt. When a quarterback puts up big numbers, but they're losing games, the quarterback gets the blame, right? It happens with Justin Herbert at times, you know, as talented as he is, right? There is a lot of, I guess, questioning of his ability over the last few years because the Chargers were consistently losing games despite Justin Herbert breaking numerous passing records, being one of the top quarterbacks statistically, including in interceptions. But when you put up big numbers as a quarterback, but you lose a lot of games, you get the blame. Why? Because you're the franchise guy, you're the head of the offense. Like there's reasons there, but I don't. They're more of, I guess, they're not really grounded reasons. They're just easy, you know, kind of scapegoat reasons, right? Like, oh, it's easy to put blame on the quarterback because he's the guy leading the offense, and you're like, well, we just need to score more points than the defense, or you need to score more points than the other team, but. Then you're completely ignoring half of the guys. Well,
that too. You don't never want a defense to outscore you on offense.
Yeah, that is also true.
Two things could be true there.
But you look at especially Justin Herbert, you know, because he's an extreme example of this. Year after year in his career, the Chargers have had one of the worst defenses statistically, both in terms of yardage and scoring. Year in, year out, bottom 3, bottom 5, every single year. Until this year, right? And suddenly things look a lot different. The narrative around Justin Herbert is a lot different. Why? Because he's winning games and he doesn't have to put up 400 yards and 5 touchdowns just to maybe win a football game. Kirk Cousins, right? I know that he statistically, in terms of wins and losses, he hasn't been great in primetime in his career. So maybe some of those jokes are warranted. But holistically, right, he has this rap of not being a great quarterback when going back to his times in Washington, putting up numbers. Why did he lose games, though?
Yeah.
It wasn't all on him. Yeah, it's not like he's perfect and blameless, right? Like, yeah, there's some games where he makes some mistakes or whatnot, like, but that happens to every quarterback. But when you consistently have a poor defense, like he did have in Washington, like he has had, you know, in Minnesota before he left, of course you're going to lose games. Like it's going to happen, right? No matter how good of a quarterback you are. So I think that the quarterback position happens to be the one position where even if you do your job, play great, and put up big numbers, but lose, you're going to take a lot of flack for it. And Kirk Cousins, just like Justin Herbert, happens to be one of those guys who consistently finds themselves in that position, putting up big numbers, yet they have a consistently bad defense that causes them to lose games. That's kind of how I see it. And then when you look at it this year, Darnold steps into that situation. He's playing well. The first few weeks, the defense looks unbeatable, right? Then teams kind of figure out Brian Flores and what he's trying to do, but they're still, playing well. Maybe not as
effective
like the defense is kind of slowed down, but still, I think that a lot of what's happened with Kirk Cousins and Justin Herbert is really just misplaced blame, I think, because it's easy to blame the quarterback. It's not as easy to look at a defense and be like, oh, this is where we went wrong here. It's easy to say, oh, the quarterback missed that throw. Oh, how do you not score 60 points this week when your defense allowed 47? Like that kind of stuff.
Well, the quarterback's always going to live and die by the criticism of the full team performance. It's just it comes with the territory. Doesn't make it right. No, and people that are real, we understand that.
Right.
We're not going to go to the easy place and say that the quarterback is the problem. Let me read off some stats here. So in 8 games so far, Sam Darnold has a 69% completion percentage, 1,900 yards, 17 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions. Right? That's in 8 games. Last year, Kirk up to this point was and mind you, Sam Darnold's record is 6-2. Kirk Cousins' record was 4-4 last year. Up to this point in time, he had a 69% completion percentage. Eerie, how similar that is. 2,331 yards passing, 18 touchdowns, so only one off of Sam Darnold, and 5 interceptions. So they've had, not only Sam Darnold has more interceptions, Kirk had less and more yards at this point in time. And let's put it like this. I guess you could say maybe not even the rushing yards account to make up the total yardage. He has 168 for Sam Darnold right now. So Kirk Cousins had 25 at the time. So better performance 4-4. A good performance by Sam Darnold. We were talking about him being an MVP favorite up, the first 5 weeks of the season. And he's 6-2. The only differences between the defenses are very eerily similar. This year's team is only allowing 10 more yards in total defense, and they're ranked number 16 at 331 yards allowed a game. This year, they're at 322 yards a game, and they're ranked 12th. So not a huge difference. It's a 10-yard difference. Or, roughly a 8 or 9 yard difference there.
Not too much, though.
But they're winning more this season with I'm sorry. I actually flip-flopped them. 2023, they were ranked 12th with 322. And this year, they're giving up more yardage. And they have a worse defense at the rank 16. So it's actually the opposite. But still, it's so similar, not only from the defenses, but to both of the quarterback plays. And you can honestly say that probably the Vikings are playing. Or would you say no? I don't know, because Jordan Love last year for the Packers was better than he was right now. The Lions were about the same powerhouse team as they were, and they had Aiden Hutchinson healthy the whole year. Mm-hmm. Then you had to deal with the Bears, and the Bears are, they're probably a little better this year, but not by much. So it's almost the same. It's so similar across the board when it comes to situations that I think to place the blame on Kirk and Sam gets all the love this year is outrageous. Because I even said right now, if there was a trade to have for Kirk Cousins for Trevor Lawrence, do you think the Jaguars would be better or worse right now?
Oh, 100, like 1,000% better. That's not even a debate in my mind. Like, please.
He wouldn't have thrown an interception at the end of the game against the Eagles the other night. I can tell you that. I mean, I don't know. I think this blame that's been going on for Kirk Cousins for years he was just the easy scapegoat. Again, you die by the sword when you're the quarterback. But it's nothing but praise for Sam and how he's been. I mean, outside of the last game, he did make a couple boneheaded decisions here and there. But honestly, the running back core is better this year. Aaron Jones makes you significantly better. You know what I'm saying? I mean, what are they going to say? They had TJ Hawkinson last year. Well, TJ Hawkinson came back this week. The wide receiving core is pretty much the same. If anything, the defense is better on paper than they were last year. And we haven't really seen Dallas Turner because of his injuries. So I don't know, man. I think there's something to be said that the wool has been pulled all over over the Vikings' eyes for years, and this just to allow this man to go off and have success in probably his last year or two in the league. And not only to add, I think insult to injury too is that Sam Darnold's 27. Kirk Cousins is 35. You know?
Yeah, I think that definitely plays a factor in at least the hype for around each player in Minnesota. You look at the price tag, you look at the age, and all of that relative, and then the production, right? Which the production at this point you noted was very similar, if not slightly favoring Kirk Cousins. When you look at all that compared to the expectations for each one coming into Minnesota, I think that's where it's disappointment versus excitement comes into play, right? Because you have an older guy who you paid the first fully guaranteed contract to in NFL history who, right, produces a certain amount. You might be a little disappointed, again, unjustly in my opinion, but they're disappointed. Then you get the younger guy who really hasn't performed much at all in his career, but there's untapped talent there who not only is, on a cheaper deal, but has much lower expectations, right? Because it's like, oh, he's going to be the backup, kind of just, oh, he's going to play the rest of the year with Jason McCarthy out. We'll see how we actually end up being. But then he produces at the same rate, right? Relative to the expectations, he's overperforming. So he gets all this hype when in actuality, you're getting the same exact thing just for cheaper, which I can understand maybe the appeal of that. But when you drive a guy out of town and you trash his name and you're like, Kirk Cousins, like disappointment, but then you get the same exact thing out of a younger guy who came in with lower expectations, and you're praising his name again, justly so. He deserves praise. Like Darnold has done very well this year, but to treat them that differently simply based off of expectations of how their time in Minnesota would go is kind of wild to me, considering they are both performing very, very similarly, right? So, Darnold's performing similarly to how Cousins did.
Yeah, and Slyball says it's about having a cat to pay new talent. Did y'all think about that? Sam Darnold, $10 million, Kirk, $50 million.
It definitely helps from a roster building perspective, but
it's Kirk's one extra touch
are cheering for.
Yeah, it's Kirk's one extra touchdown worth $40 million, not being able to get Van Ginkel and Grenard. If you care, so as an organization, yes, you want to absolutely build around everybody, but that's not our problem. The problem that we're saying is that for years, it has nothing to do with the money in this conversation. The question is, was Kirk Cousins scapegoated out of being respected for the Vikings for what he had done? And we're saying that not, and who knows what the conversation would have been like. Kirk might have wanted to stay there. He said that he wanted to stay there for the rest of his career, and you guys shipped him out. There was no possibility of even working out a deal for him to stay there and to continue to do what he's doing at 35. what's hilarious is that Sam is 27, having 17 touchdowns. This dude was 35 and had better production last year on a worse team. That in itself is embarrassing. We're not saying that Sam Darnold is bad. We're just saying like the fans and everybody didn't respect what Kirk had did. And now he went to the Atlanta Falcons. And let's not say Darnell Mooney was a all-star. Let's not say that, what's his name? The kick returner dude. Why am I drawing a blank on his name?
Ray McLeod?
Yeah, Ray McLeod.
He was this return specialist his entire career in Buffalo.
Yeah. Well, it was this world beater. Let's not act like Kyle Pitts has lived up to his name at this point. His talent couldn't overshadow his deficiencies at quarterback. So the fact that he's actually utilizing weapons, saying that he's smart. So we're not having a conversation about the money and how they built their team. You absolutely got some studs on that team now, and you drafted a quarterback and you have a bridge guy. This is what you're supposed to do when you let a guy like that go. I think that should be the expected outcome, right? But what we're saying is like they're not that much better even with all of that there. The deficiencies that are still there, your defense is still similar to last year. Your offense is still similar to last year, even when you had Kirk Cousins. So what we're saying is Kirk Cousins wasn't the problem. There's other problems in that organization that haven't been addressed. And plus the division last year, you could have said was more competitive than it is this year, talent wise, with especially the health of those other teams. So I mean, to come in halfway through our conversation and know that's what we mean, that's kind of an indictment on you. We're not saying anything about the money. We're just saying that the dude deserves to have more credit than what he had did for the Vikings, than for the fans and everybody to say, we need a running quarterback. And then you get a brand new quarterback and you guys are winning, and it has nothing to do with him using his legs.
Yeah.
In the grand scheme of things, let's be real about it. I mean, JJ McCarthy is going to run. We know this. Mm-hmm. But can he win?
Yeah, because I don't know who would rather pay $40 million extra for that slight, like minuscule uptick in production. From a financial perspective, yes, the Darnold deal is much better. But again, like Dante just said, we're not evaluating the financial side of it. We're really just looking at the response from the fan base to what Darnold is doing versus what Kirk Cousins is doing, right? Darnold absolutely deserves to, get credit for what he's doing, but for Kirk Cousins to have done that in an arguably worse situation, just in terms of the schedule or maybe even talent around him, whatever that may be, he got drove out of town. So I just kind of see this as more of a conversation of like, why did Kirk Cousins have such a negative response to how he played when Darnold didn't? Because you have to keep in mind
you know what this reminds me of, though, not to cut you off. This season is reminding me, with the skid that they've had and the 2 losses that they had, is reminding me when they went 13-4, but when they went undefeated for a long time and then ended up shitting the bed towards the end of the season. You know what I'm saying? This is what that reminds me of, like that whole team as a whole. And I wouldn't say that the NFC North is that much better last year than it is this year. Let's be real about it. Let's be real.
Yeah.
The Packers are 6-3 and the Lions are 7-1 and you guys are 6-2. What are we doing here, brother? And Jordan Love was better last year. Jordan Love was better last year. This division as a whole, I mean, let's look at the teams that the Packers and them have been playing so far. Right? The Colts, not world beaters. The Titans, not world beaters. The Rams, not world beaters. Arizona, not world beaters. Jacksonville, not a world beater. These are easy wins. They're not better this year. You could say that they were better this year if Jordan Love was on his shit. I don't agree with that whatsoever. Because if Jordan Love was as good as he was last year, the Packers would be undefeated. And if he didn't get hurt, they'd be undefeated right now. Their roster is that talented. What they've added to that roster, just to let alone in free agency in the draft says that they're better.
Yeah.
Who's the worst person that they lost? Aaron Jones?
And you get someone
And then
arguably
you get
better than
Josh
Josh
Jacobs.
And then you let a couple safeties walk. You bring Xavier McKinney, who was playing like an all-pro.
He's got like 5 interceptions this year.
Yeah. Like you draft Edgerrin Cooper, who was NFC Defensive Player of the Week a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I guess it all just baffles me, some of the double standards, not just around quarterbacks, but even like a Kirk Cousins versus Sam Darnold.
Yeah.
Because, the narrative around Kirk Cousins is going to be, he loses in prime time and he can never make a playoff run. But sometimes, if that's obviously the goal is to win a Super Bowl every year, but you also got to be able to appreciate greatness from certain players while they're around. I don't know, man. Kirk Cousins just seems like one of those guys, especially with his journey to being a starter, both at the collegiate level and in the NFL, right? Being drafted in the same draft class as RG3. Ended up being the better quarterback of the two, unfortunately due to injury from RG3. And like his entire career path, I just think that, this is a quarterback who, for him to have played for your franchise, you're going to look back and be like, one day, you're going to, like Vikings fans, Falcons fans, even, Commanders fans at some point may look back and be like, man, miss Kirk Cousins, right? Because of how consistent he was, of how productive he was. I mean, I know that with JT Daniels, who we're talking about him later, but like the Washington fans may not be thinking that now, but they certainly were ever since he left. Before JT Daniel, or not JT, Jaden Daniels, like the last few, like 5 or 6 years or whatever it's been, right? It's been a constant rotation at quarterback.
I don't know what you're talking about. Jordan Love missed 2 games. What are we doing here, brother? If you want to say that he came out in the 1 game, I get that, but he's missed 2 games. We're not going to sit here and beat right for your team. I mean, the Vikings have some deficiencies. And reading off the numbers, Sam Darnold is no better than Kirk Cousins this year. Your defense is no better than it was last year. They're worse this year, even with the upgrades that have happened. The Lions are world beaters. Jared Goff had a perfect game and damn near had another one the next game.
Yeah.
I mean, almost 3 games straight that he almost had perfect games. Let's be real about it. And the Bears are better. The Bears are better.
Mm-hmm.
They are. One of the deficiencies that they have right now is just having Caleb Williams as their quarterback, and he's trying to figure it out. But let's not act like Caleb Williams can't throw for 300 yards a game when everything's working right. And DeAndre Swift is on his money. He almost had 100 yards a couple of games ago.
Yeah, he's a couple touchdowns as of late. Yeah, he's been putting up some big numbers in his recent performances. So, yeah.
So I mean, I don't know what you want us to say, but just to come in here and assume that we don't watch Vikings football is kind of crazy. I get that's all you watch, but that's not all we watch. We analyze other teams too.
This is not an indictment on Sam Darnold or the current team at all.
It is not an indictment on the Vikings whatsoever. That's not even what we're saying.
You're 6-2, right? Your defense, I mean, admittedly, it's taking a little bit of a hit just as more film, teams adapting and whatnot. They looked amazing the first 4 weeks of the season, right? Darnold, I mean, I even said it was an MVP candidate for a long time. Maybe he's still in that conversation. But with all that in mind, right? Why did Kirk Cousins get so much hate for having a bad defense, right? Because really, statistically, the only difference between Sam Darnold and Kirk Cousins at this point, has been wins and losses up to like this point in the season for a majority of Kirk Cousins' time in Minnesota, right? It was a wins and losses. Kirk Cousins was losing games. Why? Not because he was putting up stinkers week in and week out. It's because his defense was. So now that you suddenly have some semblance of a defense, right? Suddenly the quarterback doesn't get hated, he gets praised. look,
Yeah.
That just doesn't make too much sense to me, right? And the defense still, admittedly, they gotta keep up, right? Like if Brian Flores doesn't continue to mix things up, that defensive unit, the scheme is not going to be able to cover up for maybe a lack of high-end talent. Because that was something we talked about in the offseason, was the lack of high-end talent. And we thought that was going to bite y'all in the butt. First 4 weeks come by and we're like, holy cow, Brian Flores is scheming these guys to being one of the top defenses in the league. And now that teams are kind of figuring out how he works, what he does, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of unraveling before him. You even look back at previous Miami Dolphins teams, admittedly under Mike McDaniel as well, but even under Brian Flores, hot starts. And then what? Right?
Yeah.
They trail off year after year in Miami. And who was their head coach before Mike McDaniel? Brian Flores. Who was the defensive mastermind in Miami? Brian Flores. Who's your defensive coordinator right now? Brian Flores.
Brian Flores. Yep.
You noticing a pattern here. His defenses, they start off really, really strong. Then teams get film on them, they figure it out, and they're able to exploit it, especially the Vikings defense this season, right? You start off really, really strong. There's no denying that. But there's also no denying that y'all don't have as much high-end talent on that side of the ball as many other teams do, right? That's why y'all lost so many games the previous few years.
Yeah, and let me address a couple of these comments. To be fair, the Lions can rely on the run game a lot more than most teams. That's false. Josh Jacobs is awesome this year. Aaron Jones has had multiple 90-yard games and I believe one 100-yard game. And then you have DeAndre Swift who's doing this thing for the Bears. So, I mean, I wouldn't say that they can rely on it more than other teams. Yeah, they have two good running backs, but it doesn't mean that they're all around better because of it. Kirk Cousins had the #1 defense 2018, and then in 2022 they had the 31st ranked defense. So, I mean, to each their own. Like, there's a trade-off, but to blame Kirk Cousins for everything that's being done, here's what I'll say like this, right? Your defense is so important. If it was not, multiple teams throughout the history of this league wouldn't have even won Super Bowls. Whenever you have Brad Johnson winning for the Buccaneers, whenever you have Trent Dilfer winning for the Ravens, and history just goes on of just mid quarterbacks that have won, right? Here's the ultimate right here. If defense didn't matter, Klee, you are an Eagles fan.
Yeah.
Why Jalen Hurts had 500 yards of offense and multiple touchdowns, and the defense could not tackle?
Yeah. Defense, like, look, when people say defense wins you championships, they're absolutely right, because without a defense, you lose games and won't even make a championship, right? Like that.
Every quarterback has a bad year, so I'm not going back all the way to 2018 to make the argument now that he's a bad quarterback, because he's not. Why are they winning on the Falcons? Because their defense is pretty nice, and they complement their offense pretty well too. This is not a complicated thing to understand. And Bandito, I understand the contract, but the Vikings accepted it. They accepted that these are the terms of the contract. I don't care. When it comes to the contract stuff, it is not an argument for me. It really is not. We can say the same thing about the Jaguars. The Jaguars handcuffed the Jaguars with Trevor Lawrence's contract. The Vikings handcuffed Kirk Cousins with the contract that they got. That's not a Kirk Cousins issue. Don't be mad at Kirk because his agent fleeced them. Business is business at the end of the day. And he got paid, but Kirk produced as well every single season. It's as simple as this. If I'm doing my job, if I'm throwing 4,000 yards and 25 plus touchdowns a year, right? Then I'm doing my job enough to hold up my end of the bargain, because there's quarterbacks that do less and win Super Bowls. let's get down to the brass tacks of it. And you know this to be true. Everybody in this chat knows this to be true. Your defense is important, man. You can't just let people run all over you. Yeah. And it's even extra when your defense can score too. So I don't know. That's what it is. I think this conversation will hold more weight if we include cap space. I don't care nothing about that. That's a team thing. It's a team. Cap space has nothing to do with Kirk. That is team. I don't care nothing about that. I'm just the argument is that Kirk Cousins was scapegoated by the Vikings because Sam Darnold is not any better than Kirk Cousins was, and he has a better team around him this year. Am I right or am I wrong? Come on, man. There was no defense based on yardage when Eagles won Super Bowl.
Right, but which defense made more plays?
Yeah.
Like you need your defense to be able to make plays. Like, yeah, you can point to plenty of games that were shootouts where a team won. But who played better defense? Right? Because
hey, Slyball, you can also say that like Dalvin Cook was aging and getting hurt, and they never drafted another complement to, a running back that would complement him to keep him healthy. Is that a Kirk Cousins problem, or is that a GM problem and a Vikings organization problem? Again, it's much broader than just Kirk. Kirk produced and had an MVP-like season last year and tore his Achilles. It is what it is.
Also, I would just like to say that while there may have been no defense played in that Super Bowl, that the Eagles did have the fourth best defense in terms of both scoring and yardage that season. So they did have a defense. It was top 5. Of course, they've gotten that shootout in the Super Bowl, but they had a top 5 defense all year. The number 1 defense against the run. The number 18 against
boys
the pass.
Didn't even show up. Yeah, no boys didn't show up.
The defense just got torched that game, but it was a top 5 unit all year. So you cannot just pull up one game and be like, oh, the defense didn't play well. We're just saying, with the example against the Chiefs, right? That one game shows that if you don't have a defense, no matter how good you do, you can lose, and it's not your fault, right?
And it all just depends on which defense shows up more than the other. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So question, why we as fans of sports praise these players for breaking records and winning pat on the back, hand-me-down trophies? I thought we were supposed to care about winning championships. Here's the thing. It's as simple as this, right? I can live with the fact. Well, let's put it like this. When Tom Brady lost, no, we'll use Jalen Hurts because that's the most recent example. When Jalen Hurts had 500 yards of offense and multiple touchdowns, do you think that he's warranted to have the hate that he got for the Eagles losing? Hell no. He held up his end of the bargain. All you have to do is do this. Go look up, and this is easy. Anybody could do this. Go and look up all the quarterbacks that won and last week or the week before. Tally up all the winning quarterbacks' total yards and then come out with an average. If teams had a quarterback that had below that average and lost, there you go. Statistics matter, man. And when a player's getting a trophy, you know what that means? That I did everything I held up my end of the bargain. It doesn't, yes, the end goal is to win championships, but we have to award people that went out of their way for breaking records and things like that. Are we saying Justin Herbert is trash? No. Justin Herbert will go out there with broken ribs, throw 300 yards, and his team will lose the game. That's not a Justin Herbert problem. He held up his end of the bargain. So if he's getting trophies, you know what? Everybody else should make that the expectation. Because when you aim for a goal of I'm going to win a trophy, I'm going to break a record, that means anytime that I put up a good statistic, I gave my team a chance to win. It's as simple as that. No quarterback is sitting back there I'm going to just throw 50 yards and let everybody else do it. Because when they lose, you know what they're going to say? Oh, they were just good with Justin Herbert throwing 150 yards a game. You can't win like that. But when you constantly put up the stats, you give your team the best chance to win. It's literally nothing groundbreaking, guys. We're not saying anything that's like that you can't verify yourself. You know, it's the same thing. You know, that I hate to bring Bo Nix into this, but it's the same thing I'll say for Bo Nix. If Bo Nix was not on Oregon last year, do you think they win as much as they do? No. If Bo Nix wasn't playing in those 2 Washington games, they would have lost by 5 scores. Bo Nix didn't lose either one of those games for him. But he held up his end of the bargain because he led in completion percentage, he led in yardage, and he had 45 touchdowns, which was like top 3 that year. You do that, you hold up your end of the bargain. And I'm sure Bo was like, man, the only reason Bo came back is because he wanted his championship. You know, he wanted a championship for Oregon. But still, in slime ball, if you're coming here saying Bo Nix is asked for throwing 45 yards, 45 touchdowns, and having the best completion percentage of all time in college, what other argument are you going to come up with? That he just checked down the whole time? Because you can verify this. 750 of his 4,500 yards are due to checkdowns. So come with another argument. Come with another argument. You can honestly say this team this year with Oregon is better than last year's. Offensive line is better. This is not, we're not going to get into college. We got a college show. We got a college show. Because I could keep going and going and on and on and on and on. But the point is when you hold up your end of the bargain, nobody's pointing a finger at you and saying that you should have did more when you won an award. The quarterback's job is to be, I did everything I could for my team, and there's things that I could have did better. That is the marketable answer to the questions. Even though, as fans, we know that, like, damn, Tom Brady threw for 500 yards and 3 touchdowns, and they still lost. That's wild. It wasn't his fault. you throw your hands up like this, and you keep it pumping. You know. Pause.